Thanks, Kat. I wanted to introduce Kat Hart, who is the program director for the Loveland Business Development Center. My name is Mike O'Connell. I'm the senior director for the Larimer Small Business Development Center. And on this call, we also have Terry Donovan Kearns, who's our assistant center director for the Larimer SBDC. The reason that we're here today is we are going over in a fairly simplified manner the new payroll protection plan or PPP loan application opportunity, as well as the economic injury disaster loan. And we're going to give you some tactics and strategies of how to approach this, plus make sure that you're informed about deadlines, the program, et cetera. So the first thing I'm going to do is share my screen. Hey, Kat, I'm getting a blurb that says I'm disabled on that.
Okay, try that again.
Okay. There we are. All right, I'm going to get this in slideshow mode. Okay, can everybody see that just cover slide that says who we are and what we do? All right, this is a quick blurb about our Small Business Development Center and the Loveland Business Development Center. We do the same purpose. Our mission is street smart business education and connection to resources. So we're doing that connection to resource part now. We do a lot of classes. We do free one-on-one consulting, and we do this in Larimer County. Kat's organizations does it within the city of Loveland for Loveland businesses. So before we delve into the PPP loans, I wanted to give you a macro view of what chunk of money that we're talking about here. Most of you may remember or heard in the news that Congress passed a 2021 version of the CARES Act, which they called the Economic Aid Act. That was passed by Congress just before Christmas. President Trump signed it into law just after Christmas. And it's about a $908 billion chunk of money, but I wanted to show you where the money is going, and then we're going to do a deeper dive into where it's going to support the small business community. So let's start at about the noon or 12 o'clock position. There is the $600 per person that's going out for stimulus payments. There's a continuation of the pandemic unemployment insurance that I'm going to talk a little bit about that's in the next section. And then there's some additions to rent aid and food aid. And all those three segments that you see there in the red, they're basically calling that's a family and individual direct assistance. And then if you move into the bottom part, into the green, this is where we're really going to spend the bulk of our time today. But you have a continuation of the 2020 PPP loans. That's about 32% of this total funding. There's a reopening of the economic injury disaster loan, which we'll talk about. And then there's a new program called the Shuttered venue grant opportunity, which is about $15 billion of expenditures for those organizations that have had to shut down. And then moving up along the circle, there's other money that's dedicated to transportation, education and childcare, most of that dealing with mitigation of COVID, and then a host of other opportunities or areas. So that's basically where the money is going. The stimulus program, I just talked about that. You get $600 per individual if you have $75,000 or less in income, $1,200 for couples. The contact point regarding that is the IRS, and there's a link there if you have any questions about that payment status. And the other part, which Kat and I will talk a bit about, but it's really being handled through our Larimer County Workforce Center and the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, is the continuation of unemployment insurance. And this, as you may recall, is now available to solopreneurs or gig workers. For most of those types of businesses, you're better off getting unemployment insurance than you are trying to get a PPP loan. Just financially, it's better off. So what we have right now is an extension of this unemployment insurance for another 11 weeks, which is going to go out through March 14th. And many of you may have seen over the last couple of days a plan or proposal from President-elect Biden that would actually extend this unemployment insurance out through September, as well as adding more money to the stimulus part that I just covered. So those are the parts in red. And then we're going to dig into the green part, and this, as I said, really fall into 3 or 4 buckets. There's the Paycheck Protection Program, which is now broken into parts which are called first draw if you didn't get any money in 2020, and second draw, which is if you want another loan and you did get money in 2021. We're going to talk about the economic injury disaster loan. We're going to talk about a couple of other business relief programs that are called debt relief, and then we'll also talk about the Shuttered venue grant. So, Kat, I will turn it over to you at this point, and I think we'll start off with the PPP loan.
Okay,
and
great.
You have the screen.
Perfect. Okay. So when we're looking at PPP, the intention of the program remains the same from the first round. If you were involved in the first round, you remember in the spring, the intention of the program was to keep people employed with their current employer at their current level. So that means that they are not cut on their hours and that you're keeping as many of your staff on as you can. With that, if you comply with the requirements of the loan, it is forgivable. So those funds can be used for payroll benefits, rent, utilities, mortgage interest, operating expenses. The way they set up the loans themselves is that they were going to be 2.5 times your monthly payroll. All of this information still applies to the PPP round 1. So all of this information is going to remain the same. If it's not forgiven for some reason, if you're not using it for what it's supposed to be used for, then it's a 2-year 1% loan. But again, that 60% has to be used for payroll for it to be forgivable. The deadline for the new PPP program is what's really important, and we want to make sure that we're communicating. So last time they did the PPP, it was until the funds ran out. This time there's an application deadline. If you're applying, whether you're applying for round 1 or round 2, the application deadline is March 31st of 2020. So you have to make sure that you're talking to your bank. You apply through any SBA 7A lender. So if your bank is not currently issuing PPP loans, or you don't want to go through your bank, the CDFIs in Colorado are able to lend as well through the PPP program. So that's going to be organizations like Colorado Enterprise Fund, Colorado Lending Source, Accion, which is formerly DreamSpring. So they can help you access those PPP loans, whether we're talking about round 1 or round 2. So let's dig into this a little bit more here. Let's see here. Sorry, got to go the right way here. So they do know that the first time they issued these PPP loans, there were some issues with the program. So they expanded some of the forgivable expenses on this. Initially, when they did forgiveness on the round 1 loans, they had taken the EIDL advance out of the total for your PPP forgiveness. So some people ended up with a balance. If you are currently in that situation, make sure that you reach out to your bank and communicate with them on getting that additional forgiveness if that's available. If you were one of the people that had that EIDL advance taken out, going forward, that EIDL advance won't be counted towards the forgiveness on your PPP. So that's completely out of the equation here. Another big change is that the borrower gets to elect a forgiveness period between 8 and 24 weeks. Back in 2020, it was either 8 or 24 weeks. They've also expanded some of the organizations that can qualify. So DMOs, so those essentially are travel-based organizations like Visit Loveland, and some of those kinds of organizations can now apply for PPP, whereas they couldn't before. And 501c6s and certain nonprofits are also eligible, short of organizations that are doing a significant amount of government lobbying. They will not be eligible just as before. but it really did open it up to a wider range of businesses that now qualify for PPP loans. And the emphasis also has been on another change and another improvement is they noticed that minority-owned businesses and businesses in low-income areas were not getting served by PPP loans as quickly. So they've done a little bit of adjustment to how they've released the application to target those areas first to try and get those funds out to those impacted businesses quicker. Now, when we're looking at the first draw and the second draw, again, as Mike mentioned, the first draw is for the first-time borrower. So that's whether you got the loan back in 2020, that was technically your first draw. We didn't know there was going to be multiple draws at the time. But if you didn't apply for it in 2020 for whatever reason, you will be getting a first draw loan this time if you apply. Now, there's a second draw loan that has a little bit more stringent requirements, but those are for borrowers who need an additional PPP loan. So you already received one in 2020. You've probably already started the forgiveness process and you're looking at doing a second loan. That's going to be the second draw, and that's where some of these other requirements are going to come in, and we'll kind of discuss those. Let's see here. Stephen Krause, I'm just kind of looking at the chat. Sorry, I'm going to try and answer some of these questions if they make sense to answer now. So the 2.5 times payroll, does that include the cost of benefits like health insurance and et cetera? Yes, it does. That's where that payroll and benefits comes in. Let's see here. We'll get to information about tips and restaurant employees for second draw a little bit later in the presentation. Okay, Gary? Let's see here. So, oops, am I going too far? Okay, so just looking at that PPP loan, that first draw, as a refresher, and also in case you didn't apply for PPP the first time, you can apply now. But here's some of the requirements. So you've got to have 500 or fewer employees. It's a max of $10 million. There has been money that is specifically set aside for borrowers with 10 employees or less, or needing $250,000 or less, again, in those low to moderate income neighborhoods. So again, trying to get that money out to the most impacted businesses as quickly as possible, and some of our smallest businesses too, which honestly, that's going to cover a lot of our client base. So we're pretty happy that they're trying to target it that way. So if you're applying even now in 2021 and it is your first draw, this is what's going to be your requirements or your eligibility. Now, on the second draw, this is where it gets a little bit different. So you maybe got one in 2020 and you're going to reapply for the PPP loan program. So you can apply for a second loan under the same general terms. So that's that 2% or 2-year 1% forgivable loan with the 60% requirement for payroll and benefits. But there's some additional documentation that you're going to have to submit. So you have to show revenue reduction. So you actually have to show that you've been impacted by COVID, or your business has been impacted by COVID by 25% decline in comparable quarters. So they're looking at apples to apples as much as they can on those quarters. So you want to make sure you have all your documentation for that. The max loan amount is lower at $2 million. It's still the 2.5 times monthly payroll. That is different though for food service and lodging. That is 3.5 times the monthly payroll that your loan would be set at for the amount that you would receive. The number of employees is also reduced on your second draw. So if you have 300 or less employees, then you would qualify still. And there is that similar set aside for businesses with 10 employees or less and needing $250,000 or less in the low to moderate income neighborhoods. So that's kind of how that second draw is going to shake out. For us and for our clients, we don't see this necessarily impacting you too much or too differently than the first draw. This is going to affect some of the larger small businesses because that definition is pretty broad for small business. Now, the application form has changed for the second draw. So they do have the information. The forms are on the SBA's website. So we've got some links here that go directly to the SBA's applications for this. But just like with the first round of PPP, This is being managed through the banks, so the banks may have a different form for you. So make sure you're communicating with your banker about, what their application is going to look like. If you did a first draw loan, it will probably look pretty similar with the additional revenue reduction requirement to show what's going on there. But for the most part, it should stay relatively the same. Most lenders, from what we gather, are going to be getting their applications out, I think, this week. Is that kind of what you've heard, Mike? Is that most lenders are going to try and get them out in the next week or two?
Yes,
And
they're moving pretty quickly on it.
Yeah, and especially because of that March 31st deadline. So make sure you're keeping that in your sights as you're thinking about this program and if you want to apply for your business. So the forgiveness piece of it is also pretty important here. So you've got to do the same things as the first round. You've got to maintain your employee and compensation levels. So you can't cut people's salary or put them on reduced hours. The whole purpose, again, is to keep people employed and essentially to keep them off of unemployment, right? With these PPP loans. You do have to spend those loan proceeds on eligible payroll and other eligible expenses. So payroll, benefits, rent, utilities. Those are kind of like the main categories there. And at least 60% of the loan has to be used on those payroll costs. And that does include the benefits. Borrowers have about 10 months to apply for the forgiveness. So once you do receive the funds and you use them for what the funds are intended to, make sure again that you're staying in contact with your banker about how to apply for forgiveness and how to move forward with that process. Let's see. Terry, would you mind dumping the links for the first and second draw loans in the chat?
Sure.
I'm just going to take a look real quick and see if there's anything before we go on that we need to take a look at. Hey, Mike, do you know what type of documentation they're asking to approve the revenue reduction for PPP?
I have not seen a specific SBA form. That probably is going to be left up to the individual bank. And Kat, as you know, when we get to our recommendations part, we are recommending that the businesses be ready with that revenue information, but there is not a universal form that's being used for that.
Okay. Let's see. And then Jeanette's asked if the form is going to be the same for all institutions for the application for PPP. It will not. The bankers do get to decide how they're going to run the program. Some banks have actually subcontracted with different softwares to help them process the applications faster. So it may look different lender to lender. And then Jeanette, the other part of your question here, with the application deadline by March 31st, does it matter when you apply as long as you make the deadline? And does applying early equal better? And when will we know if we get the loan? So Mike, correct me if I'm wrong here. So the easiest part of that is when will we know if we get the loan? Was it with PPP, they had funds just put into their account when they received it, right?
That was idle, Kat.
That was idle.
Jeanette, with PPP, you're going to be talking to your banker about that. So you'll apply. Your banker or lender, they should be able to give you some feedback about their process. And that has unfortunately been pretty wildly diverse depending on how responsive the hundreds of different banks are that are dealing with this. So, and I will say that if you go back to last year, the PPP total bucket of money had money in it. I mean, they had more businesses that could have applied for that, and there was still money there. And Kat's going to talk or is talking about the economic injury loan. That's going through the SBA disaster organization directly. That loan did run out of money. So it was pretty important to be kind of timely and early in the process for economic injury. I don't think, Jeanette, to answer your question, there's going to be a real race to get in and have a first come, first serve mentality for the PPP loan.
Yeah, and I would absolutely agree with that. Now, you had asked another question, Jeanette, about the EIDL loans and the EIDL advance. So let's get into that now. So PPP was for payroll that is managed through the banks. Those are forgivable loans that are geared towards payroll expenses. The Economic Injury Disaster Loan, or EIDL, that program has, in the past, it was used for fires, floods, hurricanes, for business relief. This is the first time they've used it for a biological event, and it allowed very low interest loans over a very long term for most businesses, and certain nonprofits were eventually kind of grandfathered into the EIDL program and eligible to apply. They also paired it with an advanced grant, which was $10,000 up to $10,000, $1,000 per employee for each business. Now, as they rolled out that program, it ended up being that it was $1,000 per employee. So not all businesses got the full $10,000 advanced grant. They have, as Mike mentioned, they have put more money into this program. So they are going to be opening up the advanced grant portion of this. Now, we're still in the process of getting a lot of information about exactly how this is going to roll out. This is where it gets a little confusing. So businesses can still apply for the EIDL loans. The advanced grant is where we've got some questions on how exactly this next round is going to be rolled out for it. But if you're interested in the EIDL loans, those are 3.75% interest, 30 years, and no payments are due in that first year. You can still apply for that. That is still open. SBA.gov/disaster is the link to be able to get to that. They've extended the deadline for application. It was December 31st of 2020. It has been extended out to the end of this year now. And as we get more information about exactly how that grant is going to look, we'll make sure we get that information out to you as quickly as possible. But the difference between this and the PPP loans is this is for more working capital expenses. So it's got more flexibility than the PPP loan, which is really geared towards those payroll expenses. So Lloyd asked, is the advanced grant the advanced grant portion a true grant forgivable? Yes, it is intended to be that way. Mike, do you have any more information on the advanced grant that we need to share? Because I haven't seen anything this morning yet. And I know some of the information is moving fast and furious.
Yeah, and I would like to make a comment about that, Kat. So the grant process, as Kat mentioned, it has been confusing, and there's been mixed messages that have come out over this. Originally, when this thing came out, it was supposed to be a $10,000 totally forgivable grant for the business. And then it morphed into, well, no, the grant's going to be $1,000 per employee in your business. So for some businesses, particularly the small ones, that went from being a $10,000 grant to a $1,000 or $2,000 grant. And my understanding is that there is some intention to make businesses whole. For example, if you didn't get 10,000 last year, say you got 6,000, you should have another $4,000 coming to you sometime this year, where the SBA is going to remit that 4,000 to your lender that's supposed to remit it to you. But we don't have guidance on exactly how that's working yet. We also don't have guidance on, is the $1,000 per employee still in place yet? How do we be sure that the business gets 10,000, and what does the business owner need to do? Is it happen automatically through the SBA or through the business owner? So we are going to have to communicate more tightly about that once we get direction. But we are advising businesses to, hey, if you got 10,000 last year, don't worry about it. You're good. You're not going to get more because it's only one loan / advance per business. If you didn't get 10,000, you might have the opportunity to get more. So be aware of that and keep in touch.
Yeah, and I see a couple of questions here in chat that I think that we can answer right now. That'll really make sense. So Donna asked, on the EIDL, it states one loan advance per EIN. Does that mean if we received the loan last year, we're not eligible to apply for additional funds? That is correct. So if you received the loan already, and especially if you receive that full 10,000, you won't be getting an additional 10,000 through EIDL again. And Lloyd asked, So I understood that EIDL round one was just a loan, so I didn't apply. Is there any way to go back and get that grant? That's what we're waiting for guidance and for a new application from the SBA on, because we don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet, but you should be able to go back and apply if you didn't the first time. Okay, Mike, I'm going to give control back over to you so you can talk about Shuttered Venues Grant and some of these other things.
Okay, thanks, Kat. The Shuttered Venue Grant, and it is a grant, not a loan, that is new in this Economic Aid Act. It's there to provide support for live venue operators or promoters, theaters, museums, zoos that largely got shut down during 2020 because of COVID. The dollar amount of the opportunity is 45% of your 2019 revenue. And that would have been the last year that the venue or business operated at full steam pre-COVID. So that's a significant chunk of money. One of the rules, though, is that you cannot apply for this grant and apply for a 2021 PPP loan. If you got a PPP loan in 2020, you can apply for the Shuttered Revenue Grant this year, but you can't apply for a 2021 PPP loan. And for almost anybody financially, you're going to be far better off getting a grant than you are having to take out another PPP loan. So if you possibly qualify for Shuttered Venue, it's worth looking at. Any successful applicant, they've got to be able to show at least a 25% revenue reduction. And there's, for a lot of venues that were shut down completely, you might have had a huge revenue decline. And if you can show a revenue decline of 90%, 70%, unfortunately, then you're going to be in a priority status all through January. So if your revenue is really down, it behooves you to get an application in relatively early so you can get in the front of the line. But you've got to meet those revenue decline requirements. There's a limit of 5 entities with common ownership max. And the reason that's in there is it's supposed to be targeted for small businesses, and they don't want some national theater chain with 800 locations coming in and sucking up the money that's supposed to be reserved for small businesses for this. Like the EIDL grant, this is also being handled by the SBA Disaster Group, not through the private sector banking system. And there is not a unique window or portal to apply for this. We do know the website that you're going to end up at, but I don't have any specific link to go into the Shuttered Venue Grant that we've seen yet. And that could change pretty quickly. So if you think that you meet that requirement, it's well worth taking a look at.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Sorry, we've got a good question here in chat, I think, that relates to this. So Brad asked, his business is part venue and part recreation. How can he determine if he's eligible for this?
Brad, there's a requirement, a definition that it's got something to do with ticket sales. If you've got a certain percentage of your revenue that's based off of ticket sales, I would look at that and see if you qualify. And the other thing that I would suggest doing is maybe writing up a paragraph and making the argument as best you can of why you qualify for this. And that way it's going to at least help explain your situation. But I would probably do a deeper dive, and I can do some checking on this too, to look at that ticket sales percentage. Anything else on this, Kat?
No, I don't think any other questions have come in right now. So.
Okay, I'm going to move on to, this is not specific to the PPP loan, but there are 3 or 4 things that happen with the SBA where they're basically trying to make sure there's lending liquidity into the system. There are temporary loan guarantee increases from the SBA to a bank that's going up to 90%. That makes the bank whole. If the loan goes bad, that's normally about 75 or 80%. There's some fee waivers. I'm not going to go through all of this, but what it basically says is there's work that's being done to make sure that money flows to the banks, to the small business owner. And on the next slide, I am going to talk about the debt relief program, because if you happen to have a current SBA loan, then you're probably going to be getting that paid for 3 months this year. And if you recall, I'm looking at the first bullet point here. Last year, the SBA paid principal and interest on 7A and 504 loans for 6 months. You just got a notice from your bank saying it was paid. You didn't really need to do anything. And that's going to happen again for 3 months this year. I think it's going to go from February through May. If you're in a low to moderate income community, which most of Larimer County is not, you get that paid longer. If you close on a new SBA loan from between February and September, you will also get that principal and interest paid for 6 months. So that's a nice incentive to take out a loan. The last bullet point has to do with businesses in Estes Park, Southwest Loveland, that had disaster loans from the floods in 2013. And if you had a current disaster loan, the SBA deferred, they didn't pay, but they deferred payments through 2020. And that's going to continue through March of 2021. So you get another 3 months deferral. That's what they've been doing on debt relief. And then last part, I'm going to talk about tax improvements, because last year there were some inconsistencies between what these SBA policies were trying to do and what the IRS was still saying was the rules and the law. So some of those conflicts, most of them, have been cleaned up. The first biggie is that if you got an EIDL advance, it was a big surprise to a lot of businesses to find out that that got deducted from your PPP loan forgiveness. So that didn't make many people very happy. That has been cleaned up. And in fact, it's retroactive, where if you got deductions removed from your PPP forgiveness, you're going to be made whole on that sometime this year. I don't know exactly how that process is going to work, but that is a commitment. And the EIDL advance in 2021 won't be counted against your PPP forgiveness. The second bullet point was a biggie. In the PPP forgiveness process, you needed to cite certain expenses that you were using as your forgiveness process. But the IRS then said, if you use those for PPP forgiveness, then you can't use them as regular business expenses for your tax deductions. And that was a big conflict. That's been cleaned up and solidified, where you can basically use those expenses both to forgive your PPP loan and as your normal business expenses for tax reasons. And also, lastly, there's a question mark at the end of this bullet, but your EIDL advance is not taxable. So those were 3 pretty significant tax improvements that are in place now that weren't last year. So as the LBDC and the SBDC, we think we got a pretty good story, a picture on how this looks with these programs, but there are some things we're definitely recommending to people. First of all, I would get your key documents together, both digitally and physically, and make sure you've got a handle on this. You want your federal tax returns. 2020 is probably not going to be done for most of you, but have your 2017, 2018, 2019 tax returns. Have your business financials. That means profit and loss and balance sheet for 2018, 2019, and your 2020 year to date as current as you have it. And then I would also have your monthly and quarterly top line revenue, i.e. sales, for 2018 and 2019 and 2020. Why? Because if you need to prove that a decline of 25% in sales, you're going to need to know what those numbers are. So because you're going to have to pick a comparable quarter. I answered an email today from a client who said, gosh, I was only down 12% between 2019 and 2020 for the whole year. I can't qualify for PPP, right? And I replied and said, well, no, you can. You just need one comparable quarter. Maybe in your second quarter of 2020 versus 2019, you were down 30%. That's really all you need to qualify. They're not asking what your full year comparable is. So those are the financial statements, documents we would recommend you have. You want to talk to your banker and possibly your accountant, particularly if you are going to get a PPP second draw. The easiest path to get that done is to talk to the banker that gave you the loan for round 1. or I'm sorry, for last year's process. So I would keep in touch with them about that. I'm also really encouraging people, keep in touch with your local Chamber of Commerce, with your local economic development group. Every town in Larimer County has them, as well as us, because there's more than just these two federal programs that are out there. There's money that's coming from Larimer County that you'll probably want to apply for. There's municipal programs that are funded with a lot of CARES Act money that you want to keep in touch with. And some of these have pretty quick opening and time to apply deadlines. So I would really make a point to keep in touch with those three entities. The number 4, as I mentioned earlier, if you didn't get the full $10,000 advance, I would stay informed and follow up on that. There's a possibility you're going to get more. And when I say follow up, that unfortunately is not easy. If you've got to contact the SBA disaster group, they are swamped. It's hard to get information. It's hard to find out the status of your application. And in fact, they're advising people that the best way to communicate with them is the off hours between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. Otherwise, you're just on hold forever, and it's not a very good customer service experience, unfortunately. Number 5, talk to an advisor just about your status and making sure you're in touch with the resources. Number 6, keep good records of how you spend your PPP and EIDL money, because some of these you're going to possibly need to provide documentation to your bank. You may need to provide documentation about how you spent the money. So make sure you know where that's being used. In the case of PPP, you may need to prove that you spent 60% or more on payroll, so that you need to get it forgiven. And you don't want to have to try to piece that together 9 months after the fact. And lastly, please do be aware that the deadline for the PPP loan application is March 31st. Here's some contacts for us, our Larimer SBDC organization, CATS organization, and at the bottom, there's also a kind of a one-stop clearinghouse for some of this information. It's called NOCO Recovers. So that is the end of the info that Kat and I are presenting. And Kat, should we stop it now and address anything in the chat?
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions in chat I want to make sure we address, just for the benefit of the people who are dialed in on a phone, since they probably can't see the chat. So Lloyd asked, do the EIDL loans fall into the SBA loan category? I would assume that they do not, because that SBA loan category is going to be those 7A loans and the other programs. So in terms of like that payment, if that's what you're asking for, you know, the payment deferrals, that's what that's going to be. Or sorry, Mike, you got the name of that program. I get them all mixed up sometimes.
The debt relief program?
Yes.
Lloyd, did that answer your question? I just want to make sure I understood what your question was.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Lloyd. Yes, you go through the SBA. It's technically called the Office of Disaster Assistance, ODAs, but it's the SBA Disaster Group.
And then Kendra had asked, so among the other listed parameters, must a business have been in operation during the entire calendar year of 2020, or at least after February 15th of 2020 is the other date she's seen, in order to qualify for a first draw PPP? I'd assume that's related to the PPP loans.
Yes, I will say there are some rules that we did not cover here that apply if you started your business sometime during 2020. And generally the way that works is, you know, for most people on this call, I've said, hey, get your financial documentation together. What's your 2019 sales? You can still apply for most of these programs, but you're going to have to make some projections, and maybe you only had 7 months of revenue in 2020. They're going to have you project that out and make the argument about, well, this is the run rate I would have been at. So you're going to have to, in other words, make the argument for it. If you're applying for a PPP loan, that's something you're going to have to work with your banker on, because it's going to have to be acceptable to them. But there are, what I'll say, some additional processes that you've got to do as a person that wasn't open all year during 2020.
Mike, I'll just jump in on that a little bit. It
Please,
does
Terry.
say that for both of the PPPs, you had to have been in business by February 15th of 2020. So that is kind of the hard date for that.
Okay.
Are there other local, if businesses started after that February 15th of 2020, are there other possibilities for them to apply for any kind of local grants or county grants?
You
Uh,
know, that really depends, like municipality
I don't
by
know if my,
municipality, county by county, sometimes even by industry. I know one of the programs that we stood up here in Loveland for small business assistance, we actually had a little bit of a built in there that we could compare, like Q3 versus Q4 2020 if someone hadn't been in business in 2019. To be able to qualify. But I think that that's very specific based on the programs that you're applying for.
And then Kat, I'm sorry if I missed this, but we've also got there's a small
Thank you, Kat.
business relief grant that is active right now that is it's being organized by Larimer County, but you apply for it either in the city of Fort Collins, the city of Loveland, or the Estes Park Economic Development Corporation, depending on where you're at. But that's only open until, I believe, the 27th of January, but that's available to most businesses.
Yeah, most businesses are going to qualify for that too. And that'll be a good one. I think that's all the questions it looks like that we've gotten in chat. Should we open it up? It looks like we've got another 10, 15 minutes. Does anyone else have questions? Maybe they haven't asked in chat that they want to ask over video.
Hey, Kat, can I make one comment too, if I may? One of the reasons that we're doing this coffee, and one of the reasons that we're really recommending keep in touch with us, keep in touch with your Chamber of Commerce, keep in touch with your town's economic development group is, I know how busy small business owners are right now, and there's just a lot of stuff that is coming out right now that is fairly complicated. So that's why we're saying just be aware of the big picture stuff. Be aware of the PPP loan, be aware of the EIDL loan/grant, be aware of the small business relief grant that's ending in January, because that's the stuff that you don't want to miss. And I can't tell you how often we talk to somebody and they're like, oh God, I wish I would have known about that. So just be aware of the deadlines. We can always help you with the details of the information, but if you don't know about it, you missed it, that's a bad thing.
So Mike, in terms of the small business relief grant, where would one need to apply for that? There's different hubs through each city, but like online, where would they go for those?
They go online and fill out an application. And Kendra, I don't know where you're located, but that's basically being run through 3 hubs in the county. So if you're in Berthoud or Loveland, you're going to get directed to the city of Loveland. If you're in Wellington or Fort Collins, you're going to go to the city of Fort Collins. And if you're in the Estes Valley, you're going to go to the Estes Park Economic Development Corporation. So, we know your info, Kendra, so we'd be happy to send you just how to apply on that, which we could get out to everybody on this call.
Yeah, and I just dropped in the chat the link to the Larimer County site for that. So if you scroll down on that same page, you'll see a section that says now accepting applications, and it directs you to each of those hubs that Mike mentioned. So just apply through the hub that's closest to you.
Thanks, Kat. You can tell who the tech savvy person is here on this call.
2 giant monitors helps. Let's see, Lloyd asked, looks like Larimer County relief is for service businesses only, restaurant, bars, theaters, fitness clubs, etc. Mike, do you understand that program differently?
I can't say that that's 100% accurate, Lloyd. I will read that, but a little more closely myself. But I think you're eligible. I think the main thing is the revenue decline hurdle. So I could be wrong about that, but we could check that out and let you know.
Yeah,
But
that's how I understood it as well, is that it was revenue decline based. I think that there's some priority money maybe set aside for some of those industries, but I mean, even sole proprietors can apply for the Larimer County one. So, okay. Any other questions that, you know, maybe we can address here?
hey, Kat, Brad put something in the chat about, had a question about seasonal businesses. What I've seen, that sometimes causes a problem when people ask how many employees do you have, and the numbers vary wildly depending on, there are some guidelines about applying with a seasonal business and how you use the numbers. In a lot of cases, that's recommended that you put it into a monthly average for the year, but there are some additional guidelines in the application about how to handle that, along with if you happen to be an agricultural company, there's some unique requirements as well.
Great. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions coming in chat then. I just want to remind everyone this is a recorded session, so we'll be sending it out after. So if you missed some of the information, you're trying to write and take notes too fast or something, you know, we'll send out this recording shortly. Also, if you know other business owners who need this information, please tell them to reach out to us. I've dumped our information in chat a couple of times on how to connect with us for consulting, how to give us a call, everything like that. We really just want to get the word out about this, and both Mike and I are presenting at local chambers and business organizations so that we can also get this information out just to a wider audience. That deadline really makes us want to make sure we're getting everything communicated as quickly as possible for you business owners.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day. Thanks for joining us.